Insider, 9th of May 2023. The Chinese yuan is becoming a potent rival to the dollar's supremacy. Here are 5 nations that recently traded in yuan rather than dollars. Axis nations battling the Allies are encouraged to use the Chinese yuan as their currency. The Chinese yuan is becoming a potent rival to the dollar's supremacy. Here are 5 nations that recently traded in yuan rather than dollars. Since the end of World War II, the US dollar has served as the world's reserve currency, dominating international trade. However, due to sanctions against Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, nations worldwide are now preparing backup currencies for trade, and some well-known international leaders and corporate executives have issued a warning regarding the influence Washington holds. The billionaire investor Ray Dalio issued a warning on an April 12 Julia La Roche show segment, saying that the sanctions that reduced Russia's dollar currency reserves increased the perceived risk that those debt assets can be frozen in the way that they've been frozen for Russia. Even France's President Emmanuel Macron, a significant U.S. ally, warned against the extraterritoriality of the U.S. dollar, urging Europe to reduce its reliance on the dollar in an interview with Politico in April. Should tensions between the US and China escalate, Europe won't have the time nor the resources to finance our strategic autonomy, and we will become vassals, Macron told Politico. The Chinese yuan is mounting a small challenge to the dollar's hegemony amid these grave predictions. According to a research report released by Bloomberg Intelligence on April 26, the yuan replaced the dollar in March for the first time in China's cross-border transactions. When speaking to CNN in April, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen admitted, "There is a risk when we use financial sanctions that are linked to the role of the dollar that over time it could undermine the hegemony of the dollar. It is a potent tool. Of course, it does make China, Russia, and Iran want to find a substitute," Yellen said. Although the intention may be good, Yellen pointed out that it would be difficult to reproduce the ecosystem that underpins the U.S. currency, such as the mechanism for international payments. Continue reading for information on 5 nations that have recently used the yuan for trade and other transactions to get over sanctions or as a substitute for the dollar. 1. Russia has already shown considerable interest in the yuan, purchasing 3 times as much in March as in February. Russia, which is subject to severe Western sanctions because it conflicts with Ukraine, is one of the nations leading the way in adopting the Chinese yuan for trade. The sanctions have severely hampered Russia's economy. Several Russian banks have been barred from SWIFT, the messaging system based in Belgium that allows banks worldwide to communicate about cross-border transactions and is dominated by the dollar. And the trade restrictions have frozen at least half of Russia's $640 billion foreign exchange reserves. This has compelled Russia to explore alternative currencies to employ in cross-border trade. Russians purchased the Chinese currency for 41.9 billion rubles, or $538 million, in March, more than quadruple the 11.6 billion rubles worth of cash they bought in February, according to data released by the Russian Central Bank on April 10. The Chinese yuan is already a leading contender. The central bank stated that the ruble-yuan trade represented 39% of all volumes on Russia's foreign exchange markets, surpassing the ruble-dollar's 34% share. The Chinese yuan has gained so much popularity that it will probably be Russia's first choice of currency when it restocks its foreign exchange reserves. Bloomberg Economics stated on Tuesday that Moscow might purchase roughly $200 million in Chinese yuan each month. The yuan is one of the few virtual currencies Russia may still use after Western sanctions shut it off from the global dollar-based banking system. 2. Brazil is trying to increase its yuan reserves and transactions. Brazil is a loud proponent of de-dollarization. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, has been one of the most outspoken advocates for the creation of alternative trade settlement currencies, even going so far as to urge the BRICS nations of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa to abandon the dollar. Brazil's central bank is already purchasing Chinese money. According to the country's central bank, as reported by Reuters on March 31, the yuan will surpass the euro to overtake the dollar as the second most crucial currency in Brazil's foreign reserves by the end of 2022. Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency said in a March 29 statement that Chinese bank Bocom, which owns the Chinese central bank Banco Bocom, reached an agreement with China in March to permit transactions in the real and yuan directly rather than using dollars as a default currency. According to the agency, the direct exchange between the Brazilian natural and the renminbi is anticipated to lower the expenses of business transactions. Lula has urged the BRICS countries to establish a single currency for trade in addition to the yuan. Why aren't we able to conduct trade using our currencies? According to the Financial Times, he started on a state visit to China in April, who decided the dollar would replace the gold standard as the dominant currency. 3. Bangladesh is compelled to use yuan to pay Russia for building the nuclear power plant. In April, Bangladesh and Russia agreed to build a nuclear power facility for a combined $318 million in Chinese yuan. Because Bangladesh couldn't pay Russia in dollars, the two nations were at a standstill for a year until agreeing to use the yuan instead. According to Bloomberg on April 18, citing two anonymous sources familiar with the situation, Rosatom, the state-owned nuclear energy company building the reactor in Bangladesh, first requested rubles as payment. The Washington Post stated on April 17 that, citing a Rosatom representative, the two nations ultimately decided to pay the agreement in yuan because China had permitted a few unnamed Bangladeshi banks to settle dealings with China in the yuan. Bangladesh's Policy Research Institute Executive Director, Ahsan Mansoor, told WAPO that the South Asian nation must act in its best interests and take a practical approach to ensure its energy security. Mansoor told WAPO that China and the US do not share the same interests as third world nations like Bangladesh. We must continue to be friendly with both. 4. Argentina will begin paying for approximately $800 billion in Chinese imports in yuan. Argentinian Economy Minister Sergio Massa tweeted on April 26 that his country will begin paying for imports from China in yuan rather than US dollars. Argentina made the step primarily to stop funds from leaving its currency reserves flooding out. Due to political unpredictability and a loss in farm exports during a catastrophic drought, there has been a decline in dollar reserves, which puts pressure on the Argentine peso and promotes inflation. The South American nation planned to begin the yuan payment program in April to pay $1 billion in imports in the Chinese currency, followed by payments of about $790 million every month. According to Massa's tweet, these kinds of actions strengthen our reserves. They are essential to enhance their prospects, providing us more freedom and power to act against those who over and speculatively speculate on the state of the economy. According to Massa, Reuters reports that import orders based on the yuan may soon be authorized in 90 days rather than the usual 180 days. 5. For years, Iran has traded with China using the yuan. Severely penalized as early as 2010, Iran was considering utilizing the yuan to settle trade. Then, according to the BBC, China began purchasing crude oil from Iran in 2012 using the yuan. Iran and other major world powers, including the US under the Obama administration, achieved an agreement in 2016 that limited Iran's ability to acquire nuclear weapons, but the détente didn't continue. As a result, sanctions against Iran were eased. following the unilateral withdrawal of the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal by then-President Donald Trump in 2018, the U.S. reimposed sanctions against Iran. Iranian banks have been barred from using SWIFT since 2018, much like Russian banks, which has prompted Tehran to hunt for an alternative payment mechanism. Beijing and Tehran discussed using the yuan and the Iranian rial more frequently for bilateral trade in February 2023. A sizable portion of transactions between the two parties is already conducted in yuan. Iranian Finance Minister Ahsan Kunduz told the Financial Tribune that the use of Chinese currency needed to be simplified, and the Central Bank of Iran is now in talks with the Chinese government to resolve the matter. Not only the yuan, though. According to Al Jazeera, Iran also established a connection with Russia's STM, System for Transfer of Financial Messages, payment system in February of this year. According to the news source, Mohammad Reza Farzan, the governor of Iran's central bank, stated that the financial conduit between Iran and the rest of the world is again open.